The MCU is amazing. Mostly. I'll always be more than willing to admit that Marvel movies aren't perfect 10 out of 10 movies. Even their best movies have flaws, albeit very minor ones compared to how good these movies are. But as more and more of these movies are made, some problems in the overall concept of the heroes in this universe have begun to pop up. I first started thinking about this after seeing Incredibles 2 and Ant-Man and the Wasp back to back. Both were fine, nothing too special, but my favorite parts of either of the films were the various superhero fights in Incredibles 2. Seeing two supers with completely different powers using them to outsmart each other was really entertaining and fun to watch. Along with that, the Incredibles series has always been great with giving characters powers that represent their personalities or role in the family. And that got me thinking about the way Marvel handles its superpowers. Once I left Incredibles 2 and immediately walked into Ant-Man and the Wasp, I noticed something about the MCU as a whole that's pretty disappointing. For all the fun, interesting stories and action that Marvel movies give us, they've continuously hindered themselves by underutilizing the unique opportunities that come with the concept of superpowers, in both action and in character development. But why do I think that? Every single power in the MCU is made for combat, and almost exclusively for conventional fighting like hand-to-hand combat or firefights. Well, yeah, duh, of course they are. Superpowers are made for fighting. Well, not really. Sure, superpowers have their time to shine when they let people fly around, punch people through buildings, shoot fire and lasers and lightning. Oh my! But in so many other movies and shows, superpowers are used to give us a deeper insight into the characters. They're used to express personality traits and motivations unique to the hero or villain, and lead to interesting drama from there. But in the MCU, nearly all of the powers or abilities our heroes and villains have boiled down to fighting. I mean, first let's look at the MCU heroes, along with one villain, Loki. The only villain whose innate powers are interesting or unique whatsoever. Tony Stark, despite the Iron Man suit being literally made for war, is actually probably the best use of his abilities outside of the big fights. Tony not only uses the suits in comedic ways, but his relationship to his identity as Iron Man is the root of a lot of character development and tension between him, Pepper, and the other Avengers. From Iron Man 1 all the way to Infinity War, we see Tony grow into a functioning, caring person, while also staying fatally loyal to the reason for Iron Man's existence.
There is nothing to sign. There is the next mission, and nothing else.
His personal growth gives new reason for his dedication to being a superhero in basically every movie, as he gets more and more conscious of being a protector rather than a destroyer.
I have a plan. Attack.
I did listen, kid.
Who do you think called the FBI, huh?
What if somebody had died tonight? Different story, right? Because that's on you. And if you died, I feel like that's on me.
Along with that, the fact that Tony is constantly making new versions of the suit not only shows us his innovative nature, but also shows us that this is something that he can't stop doing. For so many reasons, Tony Stark is one of the best developed characters in the MCU. As he should be, since he's been here since day one. When it comes to fights though, he's pretty standard, either using realistic weapons or throwing punches when it comes down to it. So even though a lot can be read into his character, there's only a few unique ways he acts in a brawl. Loki, as the one villain I'm going to talk about, is probably the second best use of powers in ways that help define his character. This connection is simple and clear. Loki is a trickster, constantly using lies and deceit to get the upper hand, and his powers match that exactly. He can change his own appearance and create illusions that allow him an advantage in either short-term fighting situations or the long game, or simply to stay safe as he's extremely cautious and very protective of himself. He also uses his powers for unprompted comedic reasons, which again, very few of the characters actually do in the MCU. Loki's powers are probably the ones that best fit the character one-to-one, and are ones you couldn't just give to someone else. On the other side of this topic, another example of powers being used well is Spider-Man. I'm not going to focus on his powers as they tie to his personality, since it's really how he uses his powers that I want to talk about. Spider-Man is the best example in the MCU of superpowers being used creatively in action. Sure, there's still a fair amount of but Spider-Man probably has the best spread of creative solutions for his various problems both in and out of fights. Climbing things, his enhanced strength, and especially his webs are all used in fun ways that make him stand out in a scene. instead of just being another colorful character punching and shooting their way through a crowd. He's actually unique and does pretty well by his powers. Everyone else, though, is a little suspect. Hulk is literally made to just be a giant punching machine. Quicksilver uses his speed to punch people faster. Ant-Man and the Wasp, and this is really what started me thinking about this topic, have some fun uses of the ability to shrink and grow other things, but especially in the second movie, they really only use it for a split second in an actual fight to get a better punch in. Their fights with Ghost got more and more boring as I realized it was all just punch, punch, kick, shrink, oh, now I'm over here, punch, oh, I ghosted through you to punch you. Ant-Man was a lot more exciting when he was using his powers to, say, get inside of the Iron Man suit, or using it more stealthily. His lack of control in Ant-Man and the Wasp didn't help my enjoyment either. Scarlet Witch, Vision, and Doctor Strange are all in the same weird boat for me. I feel like their powers are drastically nerfed from what they could actually do, whereupon they, once again, devolve into close-up fighting way too much. Doctor Strange is the only one to really get away with cool stuff, and I really like it when he does, but a lot of times he still uses magic to basically enhance standard fighting. And both Scarlet Witch and Vision feel like they could use their powers for so much more than they usually do, and are overall pretty let down by the ways they're treated in the movies.
Why was she up there all this time?
Thor's okay. His powers do sometimes feed into his personal struggles and understanding of himself, depending on the movie, but he still doesn't really use them for anything but fighting. And then every other hero basically falls under better than a normal person, but also really good at one thing. Cap, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Black Panther, Bucky, and all of the Guardians are more or less just normal fighters that survive insanely long, either because of clearly stated reasons, or just because the writers didn't want them to die yet. Groot is a little more interesting because of his unique powers, but he never really has them countered in any interesting way, and Mantis is fairly limited in her usefulness because of what her powers allow. Captain America is probably the one that hurts from this the most, because even though he's had a great personal arc in terms of his beliefs and personal code, his powers haven't really been relevant to his personality since the first movie. That means that 2.5 of these main characters have powers that interestingly tie into their personalities, and 3 or 4 whose powers are presented in interesting ways in fights. Now, most of these heroes do have the potential to do really awesome stuff with their powers, so what in the movies is stopping them from doing so? Well, really, the problem is with what they're going up against. More often than not, these heroes are using their powers to fight either A, expendable drones that are basically like fighting regular people, or B, fighting someone with the exact same or similar powers and strengths as them. In Incredibles 2, the wide range of unique powers being used against each other creates situations that actually let you see cool ways for the powers to be used. This goes for Incredibles 2. No, not Incredibles 2 again, like Incredibles 1 as well. But in the Marvel movies, the heroes rarely get the chance to experiment with new ways to use their powers, and it just goes back to the usual punching, shooting, or normal ways to use them. They're rarely challenged to think outside of the box, and because of this, their identity as it's tied to their powers has largely been static or inconsistent for the run of the MCU. But again, the fighting should only be one part of the whole universe. And while the Marvel Universe doesn't set up fights so that the heroes can use their powers in the best way possible, it's even worse at making those powers relevant to their characters, as I said before. So I want to talk about 4 other pieces of superhero media where powers are not only used to show a fight, but to tell a story. Those are Spider-Man 2, X2, Chronicle, and the original Teen Titans animated show. Spider-Man 2 is thought of by some as the best film adaptation of the title character to date. And while I don't agree with that anymore, I think there's a very good reason people do think that. It's a movie not only where we get to see Peter Parker be Spider-Man, but also where we get to see Spider-Man be Peter Parker for once. Spider-Man 2 is still definitely the best Spider-Man movie that shows the duality of what it means to be Spider-Man. Even Homecoming, which is not only my favorite Spider-Man movie, but also my favorite MCU movie, really only shows us Peter struggling to understand what it means to be Spider-Man, what it means to be a superhero and an Avenger. But in this movie, Peter isn't denying parts of himself to be Spider-Man. It's actually Spider-Man who's denying the responsibility of the job to be Peter Parker. Instead of learning to be a hero, he's learning to be a normal person again, from his personal relationships to that goofy ass raindrops keep falling on my head segment. And his powers follow this arc. As the tables turn from becoming Spider-Man to becoming Peter Parker, the powers take a back seat during that internal struggle, only returning once there's equality between the two. Peter isn't Peter Parker still with cool Spidey powers even when he's not being a superhero, like he was before. Now he's just Peter. In Homecoming, even though Peter does have a small part of the movie in this vein, there's never really that full attachment of the superpowers to either identity. X2, just like Spider-Man 2, is thought of as the best film in the original trilogy. It's definitely dated now, sure, but the X-Men movies have always been great at not only giving all the main characters interesting, unique powers and opportunities to use them, but also powers that perfectly describe them as characters. Much like Incredibles, X2 and other X-Men movies show a cast of unique superpowers that can be used to fight, to evade, or to just lead to nice character moments. There's not 7 people with essentially the same ability, and whenever they fight someone, they're always trying to use their powers in a way that can outdo the opponent, like a high-stakes game of rock, paper, scissors. But what's more interesting in the X-Men movies is how each character's powers defines who they are. Take Professor X and Magneto, for instance. Both worked together for a time and had similar views, but grew apart in their ideologies, and that shows in their powers. Professor X is all about knowledge and understanding, while Magneto is all about control and manipulating things for his own use. Those descriptions apply to both their powers and their personal drives. Now look at Tony Stark, Peter Quill, and Stephen Strange. Since they share a ton of character traits and play very similarly on screen, the fact that they each have the abilities that they do is pretty inconsequential. If they all swapped powers, nothing would really feel out of place. Chronicle is a highly underrated found footage movie about 3 high school kids getting the same powers from the same weird source. They all develop telekinesis and find new ways to use it as they go along. The reason I bring this neat little movie up is mainly because of its different approach to powers. Unlike X-Men or Incredibles that showcase each character with their own superpower that ties into their personality, Chronicle focuses on these people getting the same powers and how their personalities influence their actions with them. Steve almost immediately uses it for entertainment and comedy, clearly showing how he became such a well-liked guy. With Matt, on the other hand, we can see how non-confrontational and generally nice he is. Then we have Andrew, and because of his abusive upbringing and personal issues, almost immediately uses it as a weapon. That's 3 characters with the exact same powers, and yet the writing of their characters is clear and concise enough that the way they use them completely lets you understand what they're all about. Again, look at characters like Captain America, Peter Quill, and T'Challa. If you boil down their powers, not only do they limit creative ways to use them on and off the battlefield, but they also tell you nothing about the people who have them. Maybe Iron Man will use his suit in a fun way every now and then, or Vision will do something naive and silly, but overall the powers don't have any inherent ties to the people who use them. Finally, I want to look at Teen Titans. No, not that one. Oh god, no, not that one either. Yeah, there we go. On the whole, Teen Titans is similar in its execution of superheroes to X-Men, a varied group of heroes who regularly use their powers in fun ways to outdo villains with equally interesting powers. However, where the Titans differ is in their relationship of the powers to the characters. Where in X-Men the personalities of the characters are more so what shines through in the powers, in Teen Titans each person's powers and origin consistently influence their personality and actions. Robin doesn't have any powers, but like Batman or Iron Man, he uses his resourcefulness and wits to solve a problem. Robin is always very calculative and sometimes standoffish. From there, every other Titan basically has an episode or seasonal arc that goes into their relationship with their powers. Cyborg is shown struggling to come to grips with his superhero identity. Beast Boy is fun and flexible in large part because of his powers. Raven knows the potential horrors of her powers, so she's always quiet and apathetic. And finally, Starfire knows that her powers come from her energy and emotion, which keeps her always upbeat and lively.
Peace? Quiet? Tranquil? What do I have to feel to use starbolts? Righteous fury! Your alien strength? Boundless confidence!
The closest the MCU gets to this is Thor. Knowing that he's basically a god, Thor is often very brash, loud, and explosive, especially in the earlier movies. As he struggles off and on with control over his powers, he begins to develop more humility and understanding. However, I'd personally say that the loss of his powers is more of a tag-along to the other drama going on, besides maybe in the first Thor. All 4 of these movies and shows display really clever, engaging ways to tell a story with superpowers that the MCU often lacks, and have more varied action sequences with more interesting villain powers. That's not to say what the MCU's doing is wrong, of course. There's amazing action set pieces including some great fight choreography, as well as amazing characters like Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, and Peter Parker who I've really grown to love. But when some of the Marvel movies start to become more repetitive, rely on the same story beats or powers too frequently, missed opportunities like what I've talked about do pop up and emphasize some weak links. So, what's the point of this? What's the answer to the question of what to do about this? There really isn't one. Clearly Marvel has a winning strategy and has made amazing movies with great characters regardless of these gripes. I mainly just wanted to share this observation I had on an area that the Marvel movies can improve on. With a massive chapter of the MCU coming to an end, I hope they use this opportunity to have a bit of a fresh start. They've experimented with different subgenres, different tones, and different qualities. But I hope that it might be time to take a different approach to their leading roles. Instead of separating the characters in their punching and shooting fests from their downtime and interacting with other characters more or less as normal people, I'd love to see them use the characters' imaginative powers to tie these two together. If the X-Men and Fantastic Four do wind up joining the MCU, that would present a really easy layup to start doing that. The powers could be more expressive of their characters while simultaneously amping up the action even higher than the amazing heights they're reaching now. Or they could just do what they've been doing and take half the universe's money anyway. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this different approach to talking about movies that I'm trying out. Please comment if there's anything I talked about that you agree or disagree with, or if there's anything else in the MCU you'd like me to talk about. My next video in this vein is going to be about the argument of entertainment versus art in media, so be sure to subscribe if you're interested in that, or want to see a bunch of other content I'm making like music and video game discussion. Thanks again for watching.